Okay, so this course, basically, this class is something that I think is relevant for almost every magical path. I can't really think of one that does not include ritual because it is so essential to what magic is. And we'll be talking about the distinction between that and magic and spells later tonight.
And at some point, everyone is going to design their own ritual, whether explicitly for a group project like what we're doing at SOA, or implicitly by the very factor of working through the various rituals at our disposal from various books and building something that works for you and fits your needs. So tonight we'll be sharing a lot of different examples and some basic concepts to keep in mind, like what, when we design a ritual, is an important thing to be thinking about. But also we'll give an example of how we kind of homebrewed a ritual using multiple resources and multiple techniques to create something that we feel really worked well.
Yes. And feel free to write your thoughts in the chat. As always, we will try to take moments where we are checking that throughout our class tonight. Here's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about what is a ritual recipe. What are all the steps we need to take and follow in order to create a delicious magical dish? What are some tips and techniques for how to make ritual effective? Make it strong, make it work, make it fun. What are some examples? As Dan already mentioned, we're going to be really grounding this in actual samples of rituals. And finally, we're going to do a discussion around some popular questions about ritual design, and then leave a little space, hopefully, for Q&A at the end. All right, let's get into our recipe. And feel free to jump in here, Isabelle, if you have any thoughts on these pieces. I'm going to go through one by one. So our recipe card here says, the first step we're going to take in developing a ritual is to determine our desired goals or outcomes. Now, there are multiple ways we can do this. Thinking about it is a good start. But we can journal around or even do divination around what exactly do we want to achieve. And depending on that outcome or depending on the ritual even, you can either make that more specific or less specific. We know that doing magic has impacts on things outside of that outcome, on other things of your life. So sometimes keeping it broad can be nice, but sometimes simplifying it and really making it specific is going to be what you want. You want to really drill down into that desired goal.
Because it will be easier to measure the active outcome and the success of the ritual or the strength of the ritual, the strength of those effects, if we have something clear and determined in mind. It also helps us to kind of limit any external or just by happenstance kinds of consequences of the ritual. So like a very open-ended ritual, something like the planetary prayers, aligning oneself with the universe is a very open-ended ritual.
Yes.
And it does work, but in most people's experience, it brings them into a kind of magical awareness and consciousness. And a lot of people report their life being more or less turned upside down or inside out by doing these planetary prayers. That is a broad, open-ended ritual. And if your desired goal is simply to align oneself with the magic of the universe, effective, but be aware of the consequences. We're doing a ritual that's hyper-targeted, such as not that we necessarily recommend hexing or cursing, but a hex or curse, or a desire to manifest X amount of money, or a visitation from a spirit. Yes. Those things can be very, very easy to determine. Like, did that spirit visit me in the dream when I asked, or no? Did I receive that money, or no? Did I get this outcome? If so, what were the things that happened around that outcome?
Yeah. And that has its own consequences, but that is up to you as the practitioner to decide. The other thing you can do around determining your desired goals is, what is your goal for the ritual?
Mhm.
What do you want to feel like? What do you want it to look like? Is there going to be drama involved? You can have a goal for how the ritual itself goes, not just the outcomes for the magic. Number 2 is to determine the best magical practices and mundane actions to achieve or manifest your desires. So here what we're looking at is, what type of magic is going to be included in the ritual? Are you going to use candle magic? Are you going to use herbs? Are you going to use sigils? There are a variety of different techniques the eclectic witch can pull upon to plan their ritual. And I don't really think there is a limit to how much you can pull in.
No, it's just good to be aware of, are these practices in some way exclusive to each other? So, for example, as we begin to build this ritual and build this magical action, we'll determine these practices. And for example, it may not be best to do a Luciferian working while also trying to call in saint magic or something from like the Book of Saint Cyprian, which is very Christocentric, very
Yes. Or the goddess.
angelic. Yes,
It gets more complicated when you work with these entities.
exactly. So being aware, and this is that planning stage of, am I purposefully or accidentally introducing an element which is actually at cross purposes to another element in the ritual? I can think most strongly here of like a kind of criticism of chaos magic as being sloppy or being kind of like anything goes and we'll just see what happens.
Mhm.
That criticism is fair to some practitioners, but it's mostly targeted towards that utilizing a practice, utilizing a specific entity, tool, talisman, without proper regard for the other actions within that ritual.
Yes, there's also a piece too of kind of undermining the strength of a certain piece of magic by trying to supplement it.
Mhm.
In doing that, you're working with your own beliefs as well, as to you as the magician being effective, but also the magic you engage in being effective. And if you are working with a talisman that's supposed to keep you safe, and you pair it with like 2 other things that are meant to keep you safe, well, you're kind of undermining that piece, I
Yes.
think.
Similarly, if we look towards historic magic of like the Picatrix with a spell to make someone invisible, invisibility spells do exist and they are something that are very common historically, because as you can imagine, for a witch, for a cunning person, invisibility is both something that would be useful, but also something people might come to a practitioner for, wanting some kind of protection from the sight of others.
Mhm.
So when we look towards historic practices, like in the Picatrix, it calls for like the eye of,
Yes,
what was the exact phrasing on that?
we will be going over it later tonight, but it is actually the PGM,
Oh, yes.
the Greek magical papyri. We're just excited because this semester we are going to be talking about Picatrix as well.
Yes. But they calls for the eye. I believe one calls for the eye of a criminal. The other is an eye of an ape.
Well, it's a corpse who
Mhm.
died a violent death.
Yes. And as we move forward through time, we then see that in like the long lost friend, for example, that ritual for invisibility calls for the eye of an owl, something that's easier to come by, still difficult, but easier. Well, today in our ritual, if we're doing something with invisibility or to the desire to not be seen by others, obviously the eye of a cow, the eye of an owl, or the eye of a recently dead criminal are going to be extremely difficult to come by. That does not mean that we can substitute that eye portion out entirely. There still needs to be the representation of an eye in some form. Perhaps that's a glass eye or a novelty eye. This is a big example, but it is still, we need those component pieces. Maybe something more practical would be when we work with angels and using angelic magic with the Lesser Key of Solomon or the 6th and 7th books of Moses. We do not need to go and find a rabbi who is willing to write on virgin parchment with the blood of an animal. Instead, we can simply find someone, maybe ourselves, who fears or is in reverence to a divine entity, who can write on virgin paper, so just paper that's been unwritten on, with red ink. So there are modern correspondences we can use, but we still can't just say, I'm getting rid of the sigil and the red color and the virgin parchment altogether. There needs to be this kind of transfer of intent and effect with modern devices.
Yes, liking attract like.
Mhm.
And I think there is some degree of, like, if you're trying to follow a historic recipe or a modern recipe even for ritual, that applies. If you're creating your own, you might want to use things you have on hand.
And we gave these drastic examples because the history of magic is literally a history of innovation. It is people seeing, okay, in this particular grimoire, it calls for this thing that I have no access to. And so now I'm going to experiment and find the thing that is still bringing me the desired result that is within that same like family, genus, species of called upon ingredients or items.
Mhm.
So that vein of experimentation, that theory of innovation is something that we as magical practitioners will have to do in the day-to-day, because 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 500 years from now, some of the things that are very common for us will be unobtainable.
Yeah, and some things are less ethically sourced now.
Exactly.
And we are working in a magical geography as well. This is now getting to a very broad conversation about magic today. But the number 2 step is basically like, there might be some study involved in determining what you actually want to do in your ritual and what you compare with outside of the ritual. You can also plan your mundane actions to help support your magic. Now I'm going to check the chat briefly. Oh my.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. So, or making your own paper. That's a great idea. Isabelle says, how can limitations work to your benefit as a witch in your ritual? Is a good little seed to think about. This is true because those limitations do spark our creativity and they send us off in interesting directions. Jen says, when you speak of eyes once belonged to a living being, replacing it with a glass eye or so, what's the thought between the sourcing? Is it the sacrifice or the intent? So yes, there is that element in question of, is this sacrifice or is this visual intent? For some entities, they will call on sacrifice, and that will be very clear within the actual grimoire and the tradition. So if something speaks directly to a sacrifice or a blood offering, those things are going to be very difficult to necessarily translate into a modern context. However, we can still do so. So for example, maybe putting aside money specifically for the purchase of the red pen in which you're going to write those ritual binding seals. So we're saving money specifically for that purpose, and the sacrifice portion is fulfilled in that way. And then that pen is consecrated and only used for writing ritual seals in the same way that a priest or shaman would consecrate their ritual knife for that sacrifice.
Sure.
However, sometimes, especially in things like chaos magic, we're looking for specifically, we're looking for the symbolism, something to unlock a part of our mind and a part of our brain space, a part of our consciousness. So the eye seeing you as you look into the eye is a very potent image. And in that case, that is something that can just be substituted by a glass eye or even a rubber joke eye from like a joke shop or something.
Yeah, so you do be mindful of the traditions. Karma was also mentioned, and I don't know everything about Egyptology at the moment with PGM specifically, but I am not sure if they had the same ideas like with bad karma. But it's important to be mindful of those traditions and what is believed at the time. And I do like the distinction between intention and like kind of connecting those symbols versus sacrifice energy expended by you in order to make the magic stronger.
Yes, that will also be clarified by, specifically within grimoire traditions, by the entities we work with in the grimoire. So the grimoire tradition, again, is to get you from a magical standstill to a place where the entities you are in contact with are directing the course of your magical journey. So some entities will say, I need this. This is okay for you to kind of like bend the rules on. We see that most clearly in the angelic traditions. Yes, Isabelle, tradition, context, and history, always. All right, so then the next step is the planning of the details of the ritual, including date, time, place, attendees, and deities. So once we've done the research.
And more. This is a very abridged list, but you definitely want to plan like date, time, place, if you're going to have anyone else involved, and pick and choose your deities.
Yes.
For the working, but there are more things that you can plan. You can have clothing, you can have tools, you can have sound, music, variety of different things can go into your ritual.
And the ritual does begin when we start planning it. So be on the lookout, especially after we've determined magical praxis and mundane actions. By the time we kind of move to step 3 of the details of the ritual, be on the lookout for any synchronicities, any intuitive nudges, any sudden insight, dream visitations, where something sticks out that you say that is needed for this ritual. Because the ritual in many ways has already begun. Yeah. So if the universe or a deity or your consciousness is shouting, please use this, this is important, then we do want to bring that into our ritual if at all possible.
Yeah, you might find something in a walk that you want to involve in the ritual, or put on your altar space for that, leave space for that inspiration. I think that's really helpful in planning and making the ritual effective. The other thing I wanted to point out with this point is design the ritual according to your beliefs as well, because your belief is important as the magician, as the practitioner. Work within your worldly constraints. Don't like try to do a 1-for-1 of the PGM, as we just talked.
Exactly. Plan the ritual for the magic and the world you have, not the magic and the world you want. So we're doing what we can do. We are as magical practitioners, we are working with, co-creating with, and reacting to the world around us. So we use the tools, and we can subvert the tools, but we use them as so far as we can do them.
Yes.
Isabelle here says lunar magic lecture may be helpful for those drawn into lunar magical workings. Yes, as we consider dates, times, attendees, really key into the astrological components of the dates in which we're doing our rituals.
And times even.
Yes, and times. If you can find out the hour, the hour in which you need to be doing the ritual, that can be very useful. We know historically that most practitioners did look very heavily to the stars, to the planetary alignments, to the hours.
And that thankfully is on the internet today, so you can check based on your time zone and your region what the planetary hour is to increase the strength of your magical working. Of course, if you're working with an entity, you might want to pick the hour that's aligned to that entity's planet, or you might want to like do some research and see, oh, this entity likes the dead of night, or this entity loves the
dusk and dawn,
the turning hours, dusk and dawn.
This is also a place where we're going to be taking very copious notes. The ritual recipe card that Kat made, I love for that reason, because we are taking a very experimental mindset with this. We do not know how our rituals will actually work in the real world, lest we can go back to them and say, well, I did this time, and I did this the other time, and my outcomes were slightly different on both occasions. If we're not paying attention, both a mindful attention as well as an attention to detail that we can refer back to, we're really losing out on a huge window into our magical praxis and into ourselves.
Yes, we are experimenters here. And we are leaving us opportunities to improve our magic and our working and make it more fun. But this step is not meant to hinder us
No.
or put a blockage in between us and doing these rituals. It's meant to be a kind of enjoyable process, intuitive process, allow like kind of the universe and the deities you're working with to communicate to you what would make your ritual stronger. It's meant to make this go really smoothly once you actually begin the ritual working.
Yes, your notes are for you. Maybe one day you will share them. Maybe one day someone will write a book about you and your magical workings. And if so, that's fantastic. But there have been incredibly powerful and incredibly known occult figures whose notes are just disasters in terms of organization as we see them today. Jack Parsons is notorious for having just terrible note-taking skills, both as a rocket engineer and also as a magician. However, they worked perfectly for him, arguably.
Yes. Okay,
So,
step 4.
yes.
Prepare your space that you've chosen and prepare yourself.
Mm-hmm.
This is a simplistic version, but you've basically started the ritual at this point. And you might want to do some brief meditation exercises to get you in the right headspace, or move your body in a specific way. In your space, you can prepare in a variety of different ways using your senses, such as smell. It is often very helpful to figure out where is north in your space, so you can do the directions if you're going to be utilizing that element in your ritual working. And you also want to practice anything that you might need to actually execute in your ritual. So practice the gestures. If you are doing a bind rune, it is suggested by people who talk about this for a living that you want to practice designing and drawing that bind rune so you can do it easily without too much mental attention in your ritual. So practice any elements you might need beforehand so that it goes smoothly.
Yes, if you're using barbarous names,
practice the names.
Practice the barbarous names. Now, you do not need to say them quote unquote correctly because they are barbarous. They are in some ways nonsensical. However, tripping over yourself trying to read a word in ritual, it takes you out of that moment and can feel embarrassing. I'm supposedly this great wizard and I can't read this word on a page. So understanding what words you're coming up against, what sounds they'll make in your mouth, that is very useful for the ritual proper. Another way to prepare can also be things like ritual baths, ritual fasting. As Kat always points out, fasting can also just be intentional eating within a window of focusing on simple food, simple ingredients. This is not always going to be entirely practical. There will be times where you must do a ritual on the fly or you feel you have to do it now, and that is okay. But for the purpose of building and constructing a ritual, we're going into this with the assumption that you have adequate time to prepare and you've been thinking about this working for some time, either for a group project, intent, or for your own magical exploration. I also would say that very few rituals, as far as magical rituals are concerned, work best in the immediate. So there's an argument to be made, and this is not a blanket rule, but there's an argument to be made that most rituals do benefit from planning. Even things that we consider like in the moment, like hexes and curses, if you're into Malefica.
Well,
some of the most potent
we
Malefica
have an example.
Yes,
but finish the thought.
some of the most potent Malefica is cast cold, is planned meticulously, and you can imagine why that would be.
For multiple reasons, definitely talking about that, working within traditions and karma and who assumes responsibility there.
Yeah.
But we do have an example because we just did this past Sunday.
Yes.
We had a spontaneous ritual to clear the house. And this was kind of a response of the weather and our mood. And it was like, you know what, this cleaning has become now a ritual, cleaning and clearing of our house and blessing of our house.
Yes.
And we didn't plan anything. We didn't, Dan and I didn't even talk about it together.
It just kind of emerged.
It was just like, oh, I guess I'm doing magic now. And is that a ritual? Technically, I believe it is, because I was pulling these different magical techniques into kind of a combination that made it a whole thing, made it a house cleaning and clearing.
Exactly.
So it doesn't always have to be planned out.
No, but again, it can benefit.
Oh, yes.
So the next step 5, is doing a spell to increase self-confidence, hopeful expectancy, necessary beliefs, access to subconscious language, impressions, and symbols, harnessing an emotion and a Gnostic state. This is really useful. We recommend this in almost any kind of psychic or mediumistic development. Anytime you want to become a quote unquote better practitioner, one of the easiest things to do is to cast a spell that says, I am a better practitioner.
Just channel the better practitioner.
Exactly.
Or call upon the side of the self that would be most effective for this magical working. It's normally someone that is confident, that feels that they know what they're doing, whether or not they do. Mm-hmm. Or, sometimes we're working with a magical ritual and we have to fire things. Mm-hmm. We have to achieve a certain emotional state or a sense of self-transcendence. And we're going to try to do a spell, like a pre-ritual spell, in order to make that easier for us to access.
Yes. The unwritten piece of this ritual recipe, and you'll find this in almost, in many magical grimoires and magical books, there's often things left out of the grimoire or left out of the book for the individual to find on their own. One of the steps here that could be utilized is also the pharmaca, looking for what is the herbalism, what herbs can we use to augment ritual, what teas can we make to relax us or excite us, what coffee can we drink to put us into a highly focused, focused state.
Yes, and watch Isabelle's 2 herbalism lectures at this point to realize what we can utilize on our day-to-day, what we have already in our pantries. Exactly. And I do want to make a little comment, because they are talking about why we did this, being Aries and Sagittarius. Yes, very spontaneous in that way.
And now closing with gratitude, clearing up light food or drink and going about our business. One of the things that is most impactful about ritual is the forgetting of key aspects of it, or the conscious iteration of does not matter, need not be. So ending the ritual and then leaving the ritual space, maybe going out and doing some things like maybe going to the grocery store, something that puts us back with people, or watching a movie, reading a book, doing something that is totally other than the magic we've just done. Mm-hmm. Eating, drinking is an affirmation of ourselves as lived bodies and not spirits or just pure energy.
Yeah,
helps
it replenishes our energy as well.
Exactly. So just doing a ritual is the preferable way to look at this, doing the ritual and then shutting down the magic for the day and doing something else. Mm-hmm. If we can forget the exact purposes of the sigils or which ones do which, or we can forget a component piece of maybe the barbarous names, that's also very helpful. You'll find there are various ways to increase that as well, increase that kind of mental plasticity.
Yes. And this kind of forgetting and moving on is showing confidence that the magic has worked and showing trust in whatever you're working with to make that magic happen. Yes,
Jen says any sort of reverent mind space should be before and during then, and that is correct. Isabelle says not ruminating on the spell ritual once it's done. Yes, the biggest hamper to any magical tradition or magical praxis is the lust for results. I will quote LeVay here because he mentions that in order to effectively work a ritual, one must not actually desire its results or need them. And that is kind of a conundrum because we say, well, if I'm doing a ritual for money, that seems to imply that we would need more money. For LaVey, the way that this was worked out was that that's the magician or the witches or the wizard's job, is to create a kind of state where the ritual is enough, and that the ritual supplies what we need on an energetic plane, an energetic space. So much so that we are convinced at the end of that ritual that the physical apparition is inevitable and even unnecessary because we've obtained what we needed through the ritual. Now, those are lofty words. Do not be surprised if it takes a very long time to ever feel that way. But
and from a chaos magic perspective, you are just increasing the probability that you will get said thing. And Pete Carroll would say you want to definitely prepare that with your mundane action. That doesn't undercut the magic at all. That is making your confidence in the magic stronger. And it is all about probabilities. It's not a black and white, this will happen or this won't.
Yes, as Isabelle says here, one way to look at that is the trust in the universe, deity, ritual, etc. We are not micromanaging the energies we are invoking. We are trusting that they will support us. This is absolutely correct. This is that kind of does not matter, need not be, insofar as it does not matter for you to physically bring it into being, because the ritual is complete and the mundane actions support that ritual.
And this was first, but we did speak to it very quickly. I think gratitude is important.
Yes.
As a close, gratitude to yourself, to the magic you've worked and with these spirits or entities that you've worked with. Exactly. It's a powerful tool. Tips.
Yes, so we've talked about some of these over the course of planning this out.
Yes.
However, doing journaling or divination work to be crystal clear on your desire, and doing divination around the ritual design. Kat actually was doing this a few weeks ago, and it really yielded incredible results. The divination around what am I supposed to do the ritual for?
Yes, this is up to you totally, but it was around the goals, it was around the entities I should pull in, the techniques I should use, the timing, and it ended up working well for me. Although there's kind of a story to that ritual, which is not something I can cover tonight, but soon. I think this also is an opportunity for the magician to discern what might be actually contrary to your desire, what might come up, what any boundaries are or cross purposes are to your ritual working. And then you have the opportunity to kind of tweak it a little bit or mentally prepare yourself.
Yes, there can even be a minor invocation here of the entity you're going to work with. I find that if I'm invoking a trickster crossroads entity like Hecate or Hermes or Lucifer, there's this idea of those entities fill a role as inquisitor, as a adversary. And so invoking that entity in a kind of contained space and saying, this is what I want to do with you, this is what I want to bring into my life. What's the obstacle to that? And reading the cards as if that trickster crossroad entity is showing us the problem.
Yes, and Isabelle mentioned a great tool, which is called the object of desire, or OOD, which is great for really clarifying and firming up those desires so you don't end up at those cross purposes, or you're actually achieving what you really want to achieve.
Yes, yes, perfect. Exactly.
Good. There are a lot of resources that are going to be dropped in the Great Hall after this lecture.
And we can return to some of these questions at the end as well. So, additional things to build out ritual strength will include any desired aids, chanting, music, singing bowls, candles, incense, and don't be afraid to layer things. So we will talk about this within the ritual, but you may read a ritual to Hermes or to Hecate and decide that, you know what, this is fine, but I read somewhere else something else. We don't have to disregard the thing that we find in one resource. We can actually layer them together if they prove to be compatible.
Yeah, or if you decide that they are.
or if you just simply decide that they are.
And that speaks to the previous point of working with symbols and language, magic that most compelling to you
Mhm.
as an individual. And when you're looking back for historic rituals or modern rituals that have been written or taught by mentors or teachers who have done them, you can find or augment it in a way that it speaks to what you believe.
Yes. This is the blend of the mental and spiritual model. There are some books and some practitioners who work in a purely spirit-based understanding of the cosmos, and others who work in a mental-based understanding. Kat and I have found that the strength, the highest strength form of those rituals is often a blending of the two. To blend the mental
For
model,
us, yeah.
to approach the ritual as in, this is all happening inside my head, and to also approach the ritual as if this is all on a spiritual plane. This is a spiritual model of the universe. It gives you some latitude in thinking. It also kind of heads off both the entity component as well as the conscious and subconscious component as well, the archetypal component.
Archetypes, yeah.
So we're trying to blend these things and synthesize them into your worldview as the practitioner, into your understanding of the universe.
Yes, absolutely. This works for us, but it may not work for you. This
Yeah.
is all about your perspective, belief
Some people
system.
feel as though the spiritual model is the only model that they can utilize because their worldview is a spiritual one, where others feel like the mental model is the only one they can utilize because they just cannot bring themselves to engage with or provide credence to the spiritual model.
Yeah,
We don't think it's an either or. It's on the spectrum of your comfort.
there are a lot of different models.
Yes.
So make magic that works within that. The last few are not not absolutely necessary, but you may want to call in directions or call in the elements.
Mhm.
You may want to work within a production circle. Some rituals they just don't require that.
Yes.
But if you're going to be working with entities, spirits, probably a good idea to do work within a protection circle.
Even if you're uninterested in the future in working within a circle, I would highly recommend, if you have not done it to this point, to build your ritual for the SOA ritual with at least the component and the correspondences of the circle in mind, just so that you're aware of things like cardinal directions, entities at those cardinal directions, the prayers or the supplication and the ritual action. You don't need to use it in the ritual you submit. So there's no way of knowing for us if you like actually looked it up or not, but you will find that it does provide some depth, some seasoning, some taste to
Some
that ritual.
seasoning.
Yes, if we're keeping the recipe.
Wow,
We
this
want
is
that,
delicious.
that little bit of lemon zest.
I'm not even hungry.
Yeah, just sprinkle some pepper on
Maybe
it.
I'm a little hungry.
All right, and make it fun. Ritual should be
you
fun.
skipped involve your body.
Okay.
You guys, we did a whole Isabelle and I did a whole combo lecture on physical magic, all about involving your body in magic. And I
Yes.
think your body is a powerful tool for knowing and working magic. So when at all possible, we know this through gestures.
Mhm.
Gestures are ways of moving our body that help us to do magic. We do this with the pentagram and the calling of directions, but there's also posture magic. There's postures we can assume when we're evoking or invoking gods or goddesses.
There's states that can be reached. Often in mystic traditions, we see like spinning, twirling to evoke like a
Sufi?
kind of ecstatic state. Obviously, there's like a hyper aroused state in various forms of magic.
That's involving your body.
Yes. And
So-
make it fun. That is,
Make it fun.
I really want to stress making it fun, because ritual, this action should be a good time. If the ritual bores you, or if the ritual brings you down, yes, as Isabelle said, if it's not fun, you won't do it. And also, it won't feel very effective to you. You'll leave it thinking, is that all? Did it actually do anything? However, if you leave the ritual feeling like that was great, I am totally invested in what just happened, that was so cool, it's going to feel much more potent on that mental model.
It has the weight of a good story.
Yes.
Okay, and I think we'll move on to start to speak to our examples. We've talked about 45 minutes on ritual design, but let's start to get a little bit grounded. And we're going to start with the lightest possible thing. Is this a ritual? I would argue yes.
Yes.
And I think Michael Sandler, the author of this book that I'm holding up, called The Automatic Writing Experience, would agree with that. He wrote an entire book on increasing automatic writing for people who are not necessarily mediums or interested in spirit communication even. But he even has a section called Tinker and Experiment, which is wonderful. But he has this whole book on creating a ritual on how to actually do automatic writing. So he made it a little more complex than just,
sit down and write.
Sit down and freely write. He has steps to it. He has even a quick start guide and reminder sheet where you start out with meditation. You move into an intention prayer, which is utilizing that power of gratitude right up front. Specific words and phrases that you need to write, such as, thank you, inner wisdom, for guiding me with your love and light. An invocation prayer, which was separate than the intention prayer, which was a good morning, a greeting of spirits that are going to be guiding you. And then first questions, and finally close with gratitude. I actually forgot that he wrote that, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
So that is one of the most simple rituals that we can really point to. It's not even very occult.
No, the important thing with that automatic writing ritual is that he clearly delineates the various stages. So even though it's automatic writing to sit down and write to the subconscious, the higher guides, in his case, he's very into working with angels. He's still delineating. First, we have meditation, so we're setting the stage. Then we have the greeting, then we have the invocation, then we have the actual session of the writing, and finally we have that gratitude and closing. So we're still breaking the ritual down.
Yes. Absolutely. And not every author will spell it out so easily. But the other book I wanted to point to was Oberon Zell Ravenheart's Creating Circles and Ceremonies. Which is a collection of a variety of rituals, which are both individual and group.
Yes.
I really wanted to touch on this one example that I'm about to bring to you, which is the ritual for abundance by someone named Moose Dixon, because it is a group ritual. Not all rituals have to be individual or just with one other person. You can involve a variety of practitioners and magicians. And in this ritual for abundance, we have a high priest or a high priestess, someone that's actually going to lead the ritual, someone who has done that design and planned out everything, and is going to be guiding others in the execution of the ritual, regardless of how much they know about what is about to occur. They also, or Moose Dixon also establishes a circle involving well water and fresh cut sage. So we're bringing in tools very early. And then they have a chant and a drum section as well. So they're bringing in music and a variety of people gathered, having specific jobs within the ritual.
And to clarify, one thing I do want to mention before you continue is the very first step the high priest and high priestess make is discussing the flow of the ritual with the participants. So before they enter the circle, before they do the invocation, they're informing everyone as to the way the ritual will work. So no one is totally blindsided. No one's sitting there saying, what happens now? Oh my goodness, here are the drums. No, it's everybody was already prepared. And that's the function of the high priest and high priestess within
the
this
guidance.
working.
And that's not always the case, but I do think it's a really good idea to brief the participants. Then we have the more occult elements, the invocation, everyone doing call and response, chanting. There's visioning, and then there's finally the asking for abundance. And while this is happening, there's movement, there are tools, motions, drummers are still drumming. And then they kind of, yes, and then Dana skipped to the cakes and ale step. And then we have something called the devocation and closing. So this is an interesting example of a group ritual and what that might look like.
Yes, there's fellowship with the cakes and the ale. There's the grounding with eating the food, and then the devocation of stepping out of the circle and everyone kind of goes home. There's also a kind of discussion at the very end that is optional within the ritual, but this is a good representation of a ritual structure for those who are creating something out of like a kind of post-Wiccan movement for group practice. Something that honestly would feel a lot like a pagan church service. Yes, and there's a lot to say about that, being that our high church, even a little bit low liturgical churches, certainly. What raises energy more than like singing hymns together in a stadium? Yes. I'm thinking of my past Christian religious experiences. Yeah. But yes, very magical. I also wanted to talk about Phil Hine, who is a writer on the subject of chaos magic, who has a section on invoking godheads. And it's called The Assumption of God Forms. And the way he writes, this magician teacher writes, isn't so easy, isn't the step-by-step. There, he's got a paragraph which describes how you should feel when this is happening, kind of what you should do through breathing and visualization, and really settling into the intent with a specific deity. I bring this up as an example because there are many ways to talk about how to do a ritual. And depending on what tradition you're working within, this can kind of affect how you communicate it. And Phil Hine, speaking in a chaos magic tradition, is really talking about how it should feel rather than gathering the tools and doing the planning. And like, it's more like pulling in these different, because the important thing for chaos magic is the mind space, the belief space, and the entities. And he's got that all up front. And he's cluing into the feeling though. He's cluing into that's important. How does this feel? And this is something that is very, very well fleshed out within New Thought and kind of New Age circles of like manifestation groups, where they're like, how does it feel to drive the car? How does it feel to wear the fancy expensive clothing or taste the fancy expensive food? That is all part of the feelingness of the ritual. So Phil Hine says here, this is a simple technique for identifying yourself with a chosen deity. Stand up and find a posture which for you represents relaxed preparation for action. Whereas other magicians would be like, okay, I'm going to make a drawing of how I should stand. They're saying, Phil Hine is saying, what does this posture look like for you? And then he says, breathe deeply and slowly with each breath. Let the sensations, memories, and feelings you experienced in the past working well up. So he's talking about bringing other pieces in as well. And that's the other thing I wanted to say on this specific ritual. If you read further in the book, you can see all the ways to actually make this ritual stronger. And he has things about the use of voice and how you should sound in delivering speech. Right, rhyming, rhythm, delivery. There's a reason why rhyme is so utilized, especially within like Wiccan circles, because that rhyming cadence, it's easy to kind of fall into like a group hypnotic kind of chant with. Yes. And we can almost anticipate the words that are coming because of their rhyming scheme. Yes, and alliteration was used for a lot of rune and poems and rune workings. Rune fact for the day. And then later on you can scroll, and I'm saying scroll because it's on my phone, but you can turn the pages and find out, oh, he's talking now finally about
props,
Mhm.
tools, precautions, and how to adapt to the specific ritual.
But for Phil Hine, it's all about, and you don't need to go and read this unless you want to. For him, it's all about the actual feelingness and the embodiedness of the ritual, more so than the repetition of words, which is something that's going to come up with someone like Anton LaVey, with his invocations specifically for certain purposes. So, for example, an invocation to Satan, followed by an invocation employed towards the conjuration of lust, or towards the conjuration of destruction, or towards the conjuration of compassion. For LaVey, this is about the words we say. The feeling is important, but it's the words. It is the barbarous names. It is calling the infernal names. We'll see this most frequently within ritual work that is oriented around these larger concepts, specifically around like deities and angelic entities, where we're looking for the word itself has power. This is why there was to kind of bring this into our Christianity and the occult lecture from last quarter, this is why there was a pushback to the Vatican II kind of overturning of the Mass in Latin. There was a group of theologians who strongly believed that it was not merely the saying of the Mass that was the appropriate ritual action. It was that the Latin words themselves had a metaphysical power that was not equal to the common language or the colloquial tongue. So in some ritual workings, you will find that a different language that is endued with that power or with that thought of power, that is where the importance lies. And that will have the cascading effect of making you feel, as Phil Hine talks about, more magical, more wizardly, more witchy, to be speaking, a ritual for Hecate, to have a kind of bastardized Greek as part of the invocation. And you can do this, pro tip, by simply going on to Google Translate, writing up your ritual and clicking that Google Translate to English, to Greek or Latin or whatever language you want to use. It will not be grammatically correct.
Hopefully the gods will not judge you.
Well,
unless you know Greek.
However, it will still have power because of that mental model of them doing it with power, and the spiritual model of the entity appreciating that perhaps you went out of their way to speak their own language. So we have this kind of, again, dual effect when we consider the way sound and language is used in ritual. It's important to also note that within the Latin Mass, Latin was never really a spoken language in the way that it was utilized within the church. So that idea of this kind of ceremonial language that lacks day-to-day mundane utility is a complex ritual tool.
Setting apart and sacred. Final piece on the comparison of Phil Hine and Anton Sandor LaVey, which I never thought I would ever say. But we're looking at how these people are describing the ritual and what's actually important. Phil Hine, the feeling and the basic steps and how it applies to you. Anton LaVey, all about language and the power of it, and really front-loading his ritual with the importance of the invocation and the chants and what is said. The
invocation, the chants, and then those names, again, the barbarous names, the angelic names. LaVey also uses Sumerian in the same way as someone might use Latin or Greek.
Absolutely. Right. And I did want to finally say a note on PGM. We've already discussed it because we couldn't help it. But first pages of the PGM that I'm pulling from has not one but two invisibility spells, and I believe that there are more invisibility spells throughout this collection of papyrus or papyri. And the one I wanted to briefly read to you was called A Tested Spell for Invisibility. A great work. Take an eye of an ape or of a corpse that has died a violent death, and a plant of peony. he means the rose. Rub those with oil of lily, and as you are rubbing them from right to left, say the spell as follows. I am Anubis, I am Osir fire, I am Osat Soranorir, I am Orisis whom Seth destroyed. Rise up, infernal demon, and then Eow. Further writings that are difficult to pronounce. In order you to do, be obedient to me. And if you wish to become invisible, rub just your face with the concoction, and you will be invisible for as long as you wish. And if you wish to be visible again, move from west to east and say this name, and you will be obvious and visible to all men.
So you see here from the reading of the PGM, we can already intuit that this is not a sacrificial offering, that this is the eye is here to literally represent the being perceived. It's also there to represent kind of from this kind of PGM perspective, the lower, almost human or the damned in some way. So we can play with that within our own ritual space. The lost is what's perceived. So you have like this eye of an ape not being quite human, but still having human attributes, and the condemned criminal being someone damned, or that their soul is lost and therefore unseen. So we're playing with this element of human, but not quite, and less than, and bearing the shape of, but not the actual thing.
Yes, and I think this culture is really far from us right now, so there's probably more meanings that we could
extrapolate.
We don't know at the moment. I do like the commentary though. I like that it's tried and tested, and it ends with, this works very well.
Yes. So what we're going to do, we have some shadow work rituals, ancestral rituals, and art spells. And I want to turn that over to Isabelle to talk about those specifically.
There we go. Yeah, it works very well. I do like that commentary.
Yeah,
so yes, to all of those rituals. And I think with what's been spoken to, taking what you are intuitively lean towards, what you were curious about from these different texts, and also the historical context. If there's something that you've been called to explore more into, like please add that to your ritual workings, whether it's invocation or otherwise. And Mariah brought up a really good experience too, as Dan was speaking to a group ritual of how do you best stay in communication and have a shared understanding of the importance of the mundane parts of the ritual for everyone involved, whether it is the drumming or an invocation or somebody creating a certain chant while somebody is doing an invocation or otherwise. I think that that's something really important to take to heart before the rituals become conducted in the Great Hall, and whether that is a post in the Great Hall or sending a group message to each other of saying, hey, this is what I'm planning. This is the importance of this for me, because that then gets translated, right? And then we see the importance of that from your research and from your own exploration with this practice. So there are three kind of frameworks for rituals that I have used that I found very helpful. And I know a couple of you in previous classes have asked about shadow work too. And we talked about in the dream lecture around Jungian archetypes and dream space and what is the shadow. So that is really playing into, as Dan was talking about, more mind heavy rather than spirit, or maybe even mind body rather than spirit. But I think depending on what you have an intuitive nudge towards, you can definitely incorporate spirit into this. And with shadow work rituals, thinking about the hidden parts of self that maybe you are ashamed of, or do not have the light on, or you think I should not feel this way, or how dare I ask for such a thing when we're asking for this desire in this ritual. If that's coming up for you, whether you're doing the oud or you're journaling or you're doing research, you're like, I shouldn't ask for too much, or I should say small, or I don't want to outshine people. If that's coming up for you, like, pay attention to that, because if you're wanting to maybe explore that, shadow ritual workings are the place to be for that. And that is starting a dialogue. And this can be through divination, through journaling, to really get in touch with this particular part of self. And if you're having trouble identifying this part of self, and you are into deity work, or archetypal work, or there's personal symbols that you are identifying, that you want to connect with, this is where that collection research part comes into this particular ritual with shadow working. So this one may be a little bit less with casting the circle or doing an invocation, but as a group ritual to do shadow work together, it may be, what are the interview questions to this particular deity or to this particular part of self that I want to unearth, that I want to shine a light on and integrate with, right? So that's a shadow work, very like loose, open shadow work ritual that you can explore there with. Another one that I know a lot of us have also been working with, and I think it may have been a couple quarters ago, Kat was talking about the nuances with ancestors, wanting to connect with these parts of ourselves, with the body memory parts of ourselves, of the ancestors that were before us, and what were their legacies. And I consider this with, Mariah. I'm looking at ancestral rituals as just like shadow work. What are the parts that I want to integrate to become a more powerful magician, that I can play with reality in my own way, that I know I have this amazing chorus of ancestors behind me that I can help in XYZ manifestation. Oh, exalted, yeah. Exalted ancestors versus not exalted. Yes, exactly. And you getting to choose that. So this is kind of really coming from, what is the desire that you want to have here? Is there maybe you found out something about an ancestor or part of the lineage that you're like, we got to talk about that. I need to heal through this. And how does that feel within the body, right? What supports do I need from maybe other ancestors, right? For a little reckoning, right? But also, what are some of the amazing aspects? And this can come through different types of mediumship. And with the ritual working with ancestor work, I like to do this as a couple days, and choosing a couple days to explore this. And where does this live within the body? Are there any symbols that, again, occur for me? Are there any synchronicities or symbols that are appearing in my world space that are pieces of evidence that the ancestors are communicating with me, right? And you get to decide how this dialogue looks like within your space, within your grimoire. And then the final one, art spells. And I love my good art spells. I know if you've done, it may have been the Art Witch lecture, and there is a hypnosis script for this one too. So for this, if you're deciding like, oh, I want to maybe explore like creativity, subconscious inner landscapes, what does this look like? Or are there any deities that want to make themselves known to me? Like, consider the art spell as an inner exploration is one way to take it. Another one is connecting and assigning different colors to the manifestation that you want to create, and having a 1 day, or like I have like a half day in my studio, or I have an hour or even 15 minutes to do my coloring, to do my drawing, to do my painting, to connect with that color, to create that assignment for that particular manifestation. That way, we're creating an association in real space around us to see that color for the manifestation we want to bring in. So for example, and I may have shared this one too, of dealing with some health issues. And then every day creating, I associated with the color pink, which I have like not an aversion to, but it's not my first choice for colors in my color palette. And every day just having some space to doodle something pink, doodle something in a different palette of pink. And then whatever words needed to arise. And then within, I think, a month of doing this art ritual, a particular health healing happened. And I was like, okay, this stuff works. So speaking from my grimoire, right? If that's something that feels like, oh, this feels like a little bit of a different type of spell working, ritual working, that is definitely something I recommend. And if you feel inclined to create your own hypnosis script to get you into that trance space, and I can have, for those of you that feel inclined to do that, I can have a little outline of how to set up your hypnosis script. That way, when we're doing the group ritual, you can invite us into that hypnosis, and then everyone brings their own colors that they have assigned to them, right? So you empowering the group to do that space, because one person's color may mean something else for someone else, right? We all have very different associations to different colors and what those mean to us in a really deep sense. So that exploration is a really big part. As Dan mentioned, when you even just start thinking and planning, you're already in ritual mode, which I really love. Yeah, someone please choose this one. Definitely. Yeah, Jen, absolutely. If you can do self-hypnosis scripting, there's something so powerful. You can go to a hypnotist. I know Jen and I have actually worked together. There is something magical to that, but then when you're hearing your own voice from that sovereign space, from that powerful, I think Mariah said that like bad bitch energy space, right? Which is the very high magic energy we want to cultivate. There's something very different that happens in the mind when we start cultivating that within ourselves. Yes, yes. So those are just three kind of more mind, body, mind type of rituals that are some options, some intuitive nudges or inspirations. I'm sure, I mean, I keep saying this in the chat, but I'm very excited to see how everyone combines these various different elements into group rituals and solitary rituals for everyone. Yeah, definitely self-confidence spell for sure. I'm gonna hot potato it back to the Eckharts for the homebrew Hermes on this.
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Isabelle. Those are excellent suggestions, of course, and it's going to be really cool to see who delves into what with either these kinds of like developed magical rituals of, you know, ceremonial magic or hedge witchery or ancestral rituals or art spells. This is what SOA is about, is finding the ritual that makes the most sense for you and building out a magical praxis that honestly doesn't look like anyone else's if you don't want it to look like anyone else's.
Oh yeah, be creative.
Yes. We wanted to give the example of our working with Hermes because A, it was recent, and B, I think it did kind of showcase the thoughts that we had around building a ritual to Hermes. The Hermes ritual we had was specifically in regards to our business, because the main goal was, of course, to bring in more business. As people who run a business, having more business is always a good thing, or can be a good thing. We'll put it that way. And it felt like it was time to kind of move that mercurial commerce energy forward. So Hermes was the obvious choice for that role for us. Now, we did want to augment that a little bit. There are some workings for Hermes that are simply petitionary, but for us, we wanted to turn it into a larger ritual. And that process looked like investigating what are we going to utilize when we talk with Hermes. So I've taken a kind of fondness to candle magic lately, mostly as a kind of attempt to rescue it from my...
Mostly as a Taurus moon.
Yes, mostly as a Taurus moon, and also as an attempt to kind of rescue it from judgments that I think ceremonial magicians have around Wicca, as this kind of less than thing that, oh, candle magic isn't really that good. Spoilers, candle magic is great. and the Taurus moon energy loves it. So wanted to bring in some candle magic. So we felt that was appropriate and would work very well with Hermes. We've got a green candle symbolizing the energy of the money that we wanted to bring in through commerce. And we anointed it with an oil we made of an Abre Camino oil, or a road opening oil, that we made using ingredients that would be amenable specifically to Hermes, as well as our work within the kind of the liminal spaces of the afterworld and this world and the crossroads energy. So our road opening oil was made with sandalwood incense, cinnamon, exotic spices, because the god Hermes is very interested historically in exotic spices. That kind of things from afar represented the trade and the commerce associated with that god. So those offerings seemed appropriate. Some of the offerings seemed historically appropriate, such as tobacco. Then we brought in the olive oil, which felt appropriate not only for any kind of road opening, but also this kind of Greek and native area of oils and the type of oils we utilize. We used a graveyard key, a used graveyard key, which felt again appropriate in regards to our specific work of bringing messages from beyond and experimenting in this liminal space that's both here and hereafter. So that candle was anointed with that oil, and then it was within ritual going to be burned. But through the course of reading about Hermes, we wanted to choose the correct day, as well as a time frame that worked with the idea of maximizing business. So we knew we wanted to be in a waxing moon. And then because I was going to be the one leading the ritual, I wanted to work with Hermes on the day that Mercury is in my star chart, or just during the day of the week, like Wednesday would be a great Mercury day, as Isabelle pointed out. A full moon would also be somewhat appropriate, I think, but because it was a deeply personal relationship, and Hermes is a god that I work with and have worked with for some time, I really wanted to keep it within the Wednesday or the day that Mercury is in my chart specifically. And then we wanted to add in the Orphic hymns to this, because there are quite a few different calls to the Orphic kind of pantheon. And so we utilize the Orphic hymns and the hymn to Mercury. That has a recommendation for incense fumigation, which in this case was frankincense, although we subbed this out because of a bit of research that was in an entirely different book about crossroads entities and dragon's blood incense. And the pendulum ultimately decided between dragon's blood incense joss stick and frankincense incense joss stick, and it turned out, of course, to be the dragon's blood. So then within the course of the ritual, Kat and I cast a circle. We used the Druidic Order of the Golden Dawn portion of prayer and cardinal directions.
Wow. Pulling a lot of stuff.
Yes. And we set up our altar to Hermes in the West, because he is a trickster spirit, and the West would be the place where we generally go to call in the devil, Hecate, Loki, Hermes, etc. So we do our crossroads invocation. We then charge the candle in that Western altar, light the candle after saying the prayer from the Orphic hymns. We then asked for the petition, which we wanted, which was X amount of clients and business. And then we closed the space. So lots of, yes, very Taurus moon ritual. You can see all the various threads we're pulling on here. And not every Hermes ritual will work this way. We also made a promise to Hermes that if he were to fulfill this, we would build a herm at a local crossroads for him and leave, again, an offering of exotic herb there, which in this case would be tobacco. So I am in the process of building a herm to Hermes at a crossroads, a different herm than he previously has had, and leaving then, once that herm is constructed, leaving a cigar there for that kind of tobacco offering.
That must be the seventh secret ritual step, which is to enact whatever you promise to do.
Yes, if you make a promise to an entity, do it. Not just because
With
entities,
haste.
yes, not just because entities might be real and might remember,
Might.
but also because we're making, at the mental model level, we're making a promise to ourselves, that
Yes.
portion of ourselves.
It's your word.
And if we break our word,
It's your power.
then why should we ever follow through on anything we want?
Sad day.
Yes, sad day indeed.
All right. And here we are up to discussion and Q&A in traditional SOA fashion. We are approaching our end of time. So we're now doing rapid fire discussion questions. Let's
Yes.
do it. Okay, I'm going to pose this to Isabelle and Daniel will be concise. Statement of intent. What is the difference between a ritual and a spell?
I say that the difference is a ritual is more elaborate and a spell is a more internal promise and conversation.
I like that. I kind of view spells as like a cookbook. They are useful, and I do not discourage anyone from utilizing spells of any kind that they feel are appropriate. But a ritual is much more elaborate, and it's generally very personal. One person's ritual will not look like another person's ritual.
Yeah, I think whenever you're bringing in multiple elements, magical elements, I think you're working with a ritual versus a more simple spell. Okay. Do you need to work with a god or goddess in order to do a proper ritual?
No.
Yes, because you, the magician, are the god or goddess.
Okay, that is
that was a good twist, Dan. That was a good twist.
Trickster. Yeah, I would say no. Or Dan's answer. Do all rituals have a specific timing required? Do you have to work within specific hours and things?
I say yes and no, because I think, as Dan pointed out, I mean, the more things we can add to the ritual, the more powerful it can be. And so I like to use lunar magic. I like to play with numerology and time and know the significance of those things, because those are already mental models that I play with as a magician. So if those are already there for me, it's going to be amplified.
Yeah.
If it's something that like, oh, well, now I need to learn this whole context of this number and this time, then like, if you have capacity, go for it. If you don't, but you have like, oh, I know that Wednesday is Mercury's day, I'm going to play with that. I'm going to use that. So I say I'm leaning more towards yes, just because that's my mental model of how I play with things and how I ritualize my workings. But also, as we talked about in kitchen witchery, there's busy witch times, there's boss witch times. So, right, like seeing what your capacity is and making sure the spells are happening, that at the end of the day is the practice for me.
Yeah, I agree.
I think you need to recognize external time and internal time as well. Like, what is your space? So I do think there is an element of timing, regardless of if you're following planetary time or a different, like moon phases or things like that.
Definitely.
Okay, are rituals stronger when you do them with others?
Definitely, because because there are the things, as Dan mentioned, I can make the promise to myself and then the promise to the deity, and if I don't follow through, but when there is community and we all have now spoken it into being, there's a different level of accountability there that comes with it, that also you're bringing different people's presence and consciousness to that intention. That's just amplifying it even more, which is why also when there is going to be group ritual, taking people's presence and time is such a sacred act, and being so intentional with that, right? As one of my favorite mentors, death doula Alua Arthur, always says, she always starts everything with "thank you for giving me a moment of your time," because that's something we never get back. So there's something very precious to group ritual workings in that way.
Yes. There is a different kind of mode of power to them. I don't think that if you do a personal working, it is somehow inferior. And I think that's the important thing to stress. It is just as good, it is just as important when we do personal workings. But when we share space with people, there is something that's more powerful and potent about that shared experience and the energy of that experience. Most commonly seen within like our seances. The more people who are in a seance, rule of thumb, the more weird stuff is going to get. It won't just be the spirit board, it'll be the boxes falling in the other room. Like there's that element of amplification. And by result, amplification of results.
Absolutely. I would agree with my fellow teachers. I believe this is all the time we have for discussion questions that we can actually talk about. Let's go over to the chat.
Yeah, I think we have time for a few just actual
Minor
questions from the chat.
Yeah.
Jen has one here that says full moon is Friday. I have good friends coming over Saturday. Spring equinox is on Sunday. Thoughts on releasing things that holding us back and making abundance moving forward? Is that a good time to call that in? Isabelle, what do you think?
I definitely think so. It's right, like such a fabulous bookend of things for this weekend. And then also, right, we just talked about group rituals. And I think this could be a really great practice, Jen, not to put you on the spot, of how can I communicate my intentions and the mundane parts of the ritual so everyone understands the importance of these things, whether it is journaling through what is it that we are releasing during this full moon, what has become visible to us, right, with the full moon, and then also with the equinox, what have the days have become longer now, what are the things that we're releasing, and what are the things we want to plant and grow in this new season now that we've made some space in this new metaphysical plot of land, right, that we've cleaned up. So definitely a good time to call that in for sure.
Perfect. And we need to start planning for our spring equinox rituals.
Yes, we do.
Any
other final, we have time for one more thought, question. Anything else? If not, that's fine. And we'll just move on to a brief works cited because we did talk about, I thought you were going to share some of the books.
I will.
Creating circles and ceremonies. If you do not need to buy any of these things to do your thing for SOA. I want to be very clear on that. However, if you're interested in kind of like a neo-pagan, post-Wiccan kind of view of creating circles and ceremonies for groups, Oberon, Zell Ravenheart, and I believe his wife, Morning Glory, Zell Ravenheart, excellent book for that. We also talked about automatic writing experience from Michael Sandler. We talked about LeVay. I do also want to point out Gemma Gary to get a feminine presence and a female voice here listed with The Devilish. The Devil's Dozen is a great kind of exploration of long-term rituals, of ritual stacking, which is something we have not discussed yet, but you will find that you can continue to stack your ritual on the backs of previous rituals, and there's avenues to explore there, but we'll talk about that later.
We talked about Philhine and condensed chaos.
Yes.
And finally, the Greek magical papyri.
Yes. All right. Thank you,
This
everyone,
is ritual
for joining
design.
us. This is ritual design. We cannot wait to see your rituals.
I'm so excited
to participate in your rituals. That's the thing I'm most excited for, is to be a part of someone else's ritual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. And we'll see you in the Great Hall, where we will follow up on what the assignment is.
Yes, the assignment is posted, I believe, in the Great Hall, or is it not yet?
It is, but I will.
We'll re-up it and provide additional information.
Yeah, and some good tags and resources are dropped in there as well for you all.
Excellent.
Okay.
All righty, all. Take care.
Everyone.
There we go.